Hey, welcome to Bulldog Tech Talks. I'm Thomas,
And I'm Kate.
and I finally said the name of this podcast right. I think I
This is
said Trim and
true.
Tech Breaks about 3 or 4 times in a row there.
Yeah, or five or six, but we got it. We're there.
We are on Zoom today just because I had a little bit of a sickness over the weekend and didn't want to go into the small, cramped podcast studio and give Kate the plague. So,
Bum, bum.
yeah, that would not be cool.
No.
Um, we did want to get this one out kind of soon, though, just because
Yeah.
I feel like it's kind of a prescient topic. AI, I mean, like, first of all, they call AI the conference killer because any conference that has an AI segment with during breakout sessions, everybody goes to that one and no one goes to any others. So, I mean, it's definitely a topic people want to hear about.
Yeah,
Uh,
and we kind of experienced that in the conference we had done over Zoom a few months ago too, I
mhm.
think,
I
through
mean, mo
S&T.
most of those were on
Yeah.
AI just because they wanted people to kind of spread out a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, but also just because this is kind of an interesting time of year with, the election going on. There's always misinformation and stuff. That's always been a thing. But with AI being as advanced as it's ever been right now, I think people just really need to keep in mind that, they really need to be careful about the information that they consume and the sources that they get it from.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if you've encountered these or not, but sometimes I'll be on my phone and I'll find videos of AI generated voice stuff of like actors and famous people. That freaks me out a little bit because it's so uncanny and so spot on that like if I didn't see the visual where clearly the mouth is moving at a different rate of speed that the audio is going. I mean, if I just heard the audio, I probably would have been just as fooled, that that
Yeah,
was real. So it is
definitely.
something that people should be very aware of.
And you and I and also Diane are all English majors. And I know this is so cliche, the whole 1984 thing, but the whole, you can't believe your eyes and ears. And that's kind of true now that,
Yeah.
um, it's kind of scary in that not only is it possible that deepfakes or stuff can exist and you really have to dig in to find what's true, but it kind of makes it hard to believe anything, even the stuff that is real. So again, just, make sure you're just a responsible consumer of media. But anyway, of course, we are here to talk about AI in education. And you had the opportunity last week to speak with Scott Alberts in the podcast room before I had the plague.
Yep, true.
So I was wondering if you maybe wanted to kind of give us a brief overview of what you guys talked about before we really get into watching that interview.
Yeah, it was a really good discussion overall. I mean, honestly, starting out, I feel like I'm so much more underqualified to speak on these things than talking to somebody like Scott Alberts. But we found that a lot of the things that we did speak about, we encountered in both of our fields a lot because, like you said, we're English majors. Um, and Scott is on the data science side of things. But you'd be surprised at how often you are probably encountering AI in your everyday life, which is one of the things that we talk about. Everyday application usages of it. We talked about prompting and how important it is to be mindful and be um, sort of knowledgeable about how you prompt certain generators because you're going to get very different responses based on what you prompt and how you prompt it. We spoke a little bit about some of the fears that people had, I know either across campus or just as a whole about, AI and what the future is going to look like with this incorporated in pretty much our everyday lives. And when it comes to AI in education, we also spoke a little bit about, the big thing that everybody's always worried about is cheating, right? AI and cheating, and why that's becoming a tool, um, a vehicle for that to happen a little bit more efficiently than maybe it did in the past. But we again spoke about how it is a tool rather than just a weapon, and that there are, positive ways to incorporate it and ways to use it in your class, in your teaching, in your curriculum. And at the end of the day, it's going to be here whether people want it to or not. And it's just about being mindful about that truth and how to incorporate that in a way that respects you and respects your ability to use it, but also respecting your students growing up in the age of technology and knowing that, they're going to have a hand in its usage either way. So how can they go about using it in a more mindful way as well? So yeah, it was a really good discussion. I definitely learned a lot more than I did, when I walked into the podcast studio with him. So it was fun.
Cool. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was in there in the room with you guys running the table and stuff, and I just edited that segment recently and listening to it again, I was like, dang, this is really insightful. There's some really good stuff in here.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's go ahead and roll that footage then.
Welcome back. We are here with Dr. Alberts, Chair of Computer and Data Sciences, to talk about the topic of today's Tech Talk, which is AI. Fun question for you. Could you give me your working definition of what you would define AI as?
Yeah, that's a very hard question. So, I think formally we talk about AI as when we're using computers to not just look up things, but to build new information. We know computers are good at looking up things. Like that's from the very beginning of computers, that's what we were doing them for. But with AI, we're now having it build on the information that it just pulls out of a table or pulls out of a database to actually kind of make new meaning. And then beyond that, we use the term generative AI or Gen AI to mean when you're actually generating new content. And I think that is most of what people, when they're talking about AI right now, you're thinking about ChatGPT, you're thinking about Dolly making images,
Right.
not the little word gets underlined in red to tell you that you've misspelled it. But that is also AI. That is, not just looking up the spelling of the word, but is it the right spelling in the right context? So AI very broadly is lots and lots of things. Gen AI is the one that I think we're mostly worried about right now. What is that doing for us and what is that making us worry about?
Definitely the hot topic of
Yeah.
today, but I do think people would be surprised by how often they're using AI in their day-to-day lives. Like, I mean, GPS.
Right,
Right.
GPS. Zoom is going to have AI tools in it. Word has AI that if,
Right.
And especially as we're talking about what AI are you going to allow in your class? If you have a faculty member who's saying, well, I don't want any AI in my class, well, you're probably not going to have any computers in your class pretty soon because everything is going to have this AI enhancement to it, which is different than saying ChatGPT is writing papers for the students or stuff like that.
And I know that speaking of using it in class, we had a part of this AI working group, specifically with a lot of faculty and staff, just thinking of when this does come, because it is coming, how can we incorporate AI in a mindful manner in courses? So we used, was it Auburn's?
Auburn's, yeah, they had good definition.
Yeah, AI course just to see how faculty can incorporate it in their curriculum. Do you want to talk a little bit about that experience and kind of the findings that we've
so we had thought about teaching a class locally. We had looked at all kinds of different options to figure out how are we going to get up to speed, because even those of us who deal with AI all the time, you still are just always behind how we think about it and how to be intentional about how you use it. So so we contracted with Auburn University, which has this nice AI course. And it was a pretty good experience. It wasn't quite exactly what we wanted. I think it had a lot more of it was for different kinds of schools than different kinds of classes that we have, sort of the online, more mechanical classes that here at Truman, we don't do as much of that, the 400 person lecture, those kind of classes. So in terms of that, I think it had a lot of good material in it, but it wasn't quite exactly what we want. But yeah, so I think we had about 30 people, 30 faculty and staff have started the course. We're at different places of how far we are in the experience. But several of them have finished it. And I think it was a pretty good experience, but especially that idea, even almost regardless of the course, of really thinking intentionally about AI, learning a little bit more about how it works, and then thinking about how your classes, how your experiences are going to change as a result. What are you going to do different in your classes as you do that?
Yeah, because I mean, from what I've spoken to faculty about, I think there's just a lot of fear, right? What is this going to take over? What is this going to take away? Especially the use in class. I think cheating is probably the biggest for the student side of things. And I don't know, I've been thinking a lot about it. And when it comes to things like that, I've been viewing AI often like the calculator. When it was getting developed and getting incorporated into curriculum and, usage in class, that was like, well, it's going to make students dumber because you've got a tool that can do it for you. But really, it just meant that we could do higher order thinking faster, right? Because we had this assistive tool. So I've been trying to think of AI like that. Have you found?
No, I think that's exactly
Yeah.
right. And even like teaching basic statistics, now that we have spreadsheets, now that
Right.
we have fancier calculators, not just even the simple little calculators we used to have, you can have it do the boring part
Hmm.
and you can get to the cool part faster. But you do worry because in some cases, we really do think doing the boring part is good for you.
Yeah.
And an example in statistics, one of the ones we talk a lot about is squaring numbers. That, a lot of things we do in statistics, you have to square numbers. And, 5 squared is 25 is easy, but, 3-digit numbers squared is hard.
Right.
And in a way, thinking about that, thinking about how things that grow in a squared way, that's a really useful concept to understand. But does doing 100 of them make you understand it more deeply
Right.
than letting the computer do that, doing it in Excel or doing it in whatever tool you have, a Minitab or whatever software you use? And so I think that's where, ChatGPT, one of the examples you hear is people say, well, it writes like a mediocre 10th grader. And if you can get a paper written at a mediocre 10th grade level, that's not where we want Truman students to
Right.
be and not where, certainly people teaching writing classes. But if you can get that quickly, could you then think more about editing, think more about how you add in appropriate things, think more about how you're going to use the skills you do have to take that and make it better. And I
Right.
think that's what we're still figuring out
Yeah.
with that.
I think because what I have been thinking about in the creative writing field,
Mhm.
especially, there's this exactly your point about this knowing your basics.
Mhm.
And I keep doing this prompt where I'll tell Claude or whatever it is to generate like a poem about summer in the voice of Emily Dickinson or whatever.
Mhm.
And it's just interesting because I can recognize why that's not a very good poem, but it's because I've put in the work to
Mhm.
know those basic foundations and the things like that. But if we're saying that AI as a tool can help do those tools and then let you do the higher order thinking, you still had to have that foundation to be able to recognize that. So it's almost, I think highlighting why it is still important to be teaching the basics of, pen and paper algebra, but also like
Right.
once you know that, that's great. And you don't have to continue to do that anymore when you're, at an advanced level.
That's right. And asking tools like Claude or like Copilot or ChatGPT to, look at my paper and point out errors or
Mhm.
suggest places to improve, it's actually pretty good at that.
Yeah.
And, does it replace peer editing? Does it replace editors? I don't think so. But if you could have that done first and then get your peer editing, your come to the writing center, have the instructor do a draft review, you'd think you could get further because you have one more layer and the things that it's suggesting are the things that aren't our favorite, that it's fixing the subject verb agreement, it's fixing
This
your
vlog.
commas,
Yeah.
the,
Yeah.
the this doesn't sound professional. I mean, that's one that my students get a lot, is that this is too informal. And if you say, how can I make my paper sound more formal? It's great at that.
Mm.
And it's pulling from this corpus of formal writing that it has and doing that. We've even found things like one of the things we've been playing with is if you ask it to write in a style, it will do it, but you can put in very weird qualifiers. So if you say, write this like a really smart professor, it will do better than if you just ask it to rewrite it more formally. That if you give it these very specific descriptors, and again, if you think about what it's doing, it's a fancy Google and
Right.
it's going through and it's saying, well, of all the things, what do I have in this corpus, this body of work that I'm pulling from fancy professors or from really smart people or whatever. So if you say things like, um, rewrite this like an English teacher, it can do that and
Yeah.
it does a pretty good job of that. And that's not a replacement for you learning what the rules are or what is it that makes fancy writing sound better than informal writing. But it does pretty good at that kind of stuff.
And I think that's a good point to why the prompting is
Yeah.
so important for how you prompt
Yeah.
these. I know that there are quite a few people in my life personally that have started using AI, GPT as like the new Google search for
Mhm.
them. And I think Microsoft, Copilot tends to be the first thing that shows up too
Mhm.
when you type in something in the search bar. but the prompting I've found people can struggle with sometimes.
No, for sure. And one of the things that it's in pretty much all of our documentation that if you're, instead of trying to tell students not to use these tools, tell them they have to cite the tools, they have to document that they're using them, and they're going to have to include what their prompts were and what dialogue they had with the system. Because sometimes you can really see that the students really are thinking deeply. And especially for students who have struggled, some international students, some students with learning disabilities, some students with, just, I teach a lot of the mathier students who don't love writing.
Right.
And you can see a very thoughtful process in their dialogue that gets to good writing. And I would say it's still not good at writing the paper for them, but at giving them a paragraph or helping them fix a paragraph, it can be amazingly good at that.
Big catalyst for
Yeah.
that, creativity to
Yeah.
unfold. Yeah. So you talked a little bit about how your students have been using it. Do you want to address just from what, we've heard and what you've heard about on the faculty side of things, either the incorporation of it and some interesting ways they've been doing that, or also maybe the aversion to incorporate
Yeah,
that?
I think there certainly are a group of faculty who would like nothing to do with AI at all, and they think it's going to break us, break society. And I'm not sure they're wrong,
Right.
I should say. But the problem right now with that is that I think if we want to think our job is to be the police, we're going to not be very good at that. That AI checkers are horrible.
Yeah.
They're not consistent. They're not good. They are biased against international writers or English language learners. They really just are flawed. And so, that's where I think this idea of saying, if you use a Gen AI tool, document it so that I can see what you had before you put it in,
Right.
and I can see the process you went through to make it better. I think that's going to be a lot more useful than, this red light, oh my gosh, don't even touch it, or you'll catch on fire and I'll fail you. And that I just think that's not really where things are going. But more than that, I think we're not going to be able to tell. And if you're, you know, plagiarism detection is one thing, but um, really, trying to figure out when a student used ChatGPT, it's really hard to do that.
And the bias can get so dangerous too. And and I mean at the same time, if a student has found a way to make it work well for them in a way that is facilitating creativity, like why stop that, right? If it is
Right.
giving them
And I mean, certainly tools like Grammarly, I mean, they're pretty widely accepted. And while again, you want students to learn the grammar rules, you want them to learn, if especially again, an English language learner, if their English is fine, but not phenomenal, it takes them a long time to do tasks that native English speakers think of as very quick. And having them do it more quickly is probably it's a good use of their time and better use of their time than to have them sit and go through and add S's to all their verbs or cross S's off all their verbs or whichever it is. But I think that kind of stuff we can really see improvement very quickly with students with that.
Yeah, I think it's ironic just from what we've seen of the scope of people's opinions and feelings just across campus, student, faculty, or otherwise. I know that out of the learning technologies team, I am the one who is the most averse to AI, because I think, in my prediction, in like 10 or so years, maybe, I'm thinking that if we get so wrapped up in technology, there's going to be like an eco bloom, is what my guess is, where people really want to get back to Bigfoot hunting in the woods and living in tents and, get back to our roots. What do you think 10 years looks like for higher ed?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're going to see is we're going to see some productivity gains, which has happened in most other industries, but not ours. That, you think about, oh, heck, the Hollister plant over on the other side of town, they make little plastic parts for medical research. They used to have 250 employees and now they have about 25. And I don't know exactly what they're doing, but they're still doing the same kinds of things they did before. But because they make medical grade plastic, you don't want people touching it.
Right.
That it's allowed them to make sterile assembly lines that people can't mess up. That's hurt Kirksville jobs.
Right.
I mean, that's a lot of jobs that we had to figure out, what are those people doing instead? And I think the same thing's going to be true here, that are we going to end up with larger classes because some of the grading can be done automatically? Are you going to see students taking whole class? What if you took an online AI design class and you had the faculty member supervising it, or adding extra content to that, but the more mechanical stuff you can do, sort of even thinking about what we have right now, could you take a Coursera course totally online, watch the videos, do the assignments, have it machine graded, and meet once a week with a professor? Would that be cool? And I can certainly think of ways and courses where that would be amazing and students could have great opportunities. But what does that mean for my job?
Right.
Am I now teaching 9 courses instead of 4?
Right.
Am I now touching 400 students instead of 80 students?
Right. And on the flip side, the more work for one job versus AI taking away jobs,
Right.
just like with the
Right. And that quote that we always use, that we use a lot, and we still don't even know who actually said it, but that idea that you shouldn't worry about losing your job to AI, but you should worry about losing your job to someone who knows how to use AI.
Yeah.
And that idea that if we are going from 250 workers at a company to 25, how do you make sure you're going to be one of those 25?
Right.
And how do we as faculty help our students become one of those people who still have a job even in the new environment? And that's where thinking about how we work with AI, how we prompt it, some of this work on corpus, how we make these closed bodies of work that we can use for AI, we can use for prediction, but without putting all of that into the internet. That idea that if you are using ChatGPT to grade student work, you're essentially giving that student work to Google or Microsoft or
Right.
whoever, and probably you don't want to do that. And so, is it worth Truman figuring out how to have a closed body where we don't put our work out for other people? There are companies, that's all they do, is they build little closed corpuses for different industries. We're working in computer and data sciences. We're working with employers who want to hire students who build those sort of systems. But that's a really different way of thinking about
Yeah.
the situation than what we've done in the past.
Yeah.
And what it means to be good at the job, what it means to be good at modeling or writing or coding for that matter.
Right. As Truman is thinking about writing policy and
Mhm.
getting those sort of guardrails in place, because I mean, again, I think as this stuff is so early, but so on the horizon, in the midst of us right now, I think that shaping people's thoughts is very important and making sure that we're putting across the right message. So what do you think is the message that you'd be giving to faculty?
Yeah, I think about this a lot, and I don't know that I have a good answer to that, but I think that idea of what do we want our students to be able to do, that is the number one thing we should be thinking about. Not about me, not about how I teach, but thinking about what should our students, when they graduate from Truman, when they are finished with a class. We often think about the language in pedagogy is sometimes the idea of a signature assignment, that after you've had a course, what can you mention in a job interview? What can you put in your resume? What can you put in a portfolio of work that shows that you are somehow cooler because you had that course or you had that experience? And if you think about it like that, then some of these ideas come out. But after I said, don't worry about my job, we should worry about my job, because how do I evaluate that? How do I score it? One of my retired colleagues, he used to always say, we lecture for free, you pay us to grade. And that idea of how grading is really different in an AI enhanced environment, and how much can we get away from product and move to process? Because maybe what you actually produce is AI generated, so I don't want to focus on that, but instead I want to focus on what you did. I want to focus on your reflective work. Those of us in STEM, those of us in computing and data sciences, that's not what we think our job is, right? I want to grade your code, I want to grade your problem set, I want to grade your model. But now I want to see how you thought about the model, how you reflect, and that's new to a lot of us, and not what we love. That and I think the same is true in creative writing and the social sciences, that do you want to grade poetry, or do you want to grade reflections about poetry? And
just reframing what the assessment is actually assessing.
And and how do you get your thoughts ready for the AI tool to take it and go to the next level?
Yeah.
When in the process is it good? I've talked about two things just even here in this discussion. One is using it to make a mediocre draft, and then
Mhm.
the other one is taking a mediocre draft and making something better out of it. Well, if you combine those, well, now you've taken me out of the picture completely, but it seems like it's not good at that right now. That
Mm.
idea of having AI go start to finish, you have to be very, very good at prompting to say, well, write me that mediocre 10th grader paper, and then take that mediocre 10th grade paper and turn it into something awesome and formally written
By
and
a
with the
fancy
right
smart
conclusion. Right.
professor. Yeah.
Right. That sounds like a smart professor wrote it. That if you do both of those, you're not getting good products right now.
Mm.
That you can do either. And so how do I teach that? How do I say, well, today, let's use it to make a mediocre draft, which you then edit. Or today, you go and write your thoughts down on a paper, and then we'll have Copilot or
Right.
Claude or whatever polish it up and make it snazzy. And I think those are two different things that used to be one long thing and now are becoming these discrete little pieces.
Yeah. And I think that's also kind of an interesting way, if you want to move on the grading side of things, to kind of combat the urge to want to use GPT to write your papers for you as a student. Because if you do those prompts in class, the professor knows that, this is what GPT is capable of. Here's this mediocre 10th grade paper. Okay, let's assess this. Everybody's aware that this is a tool that can be used. So now the whole class is aware that not only is it not kind of like a hush hush, like,
Right.
secretive, oh, I don't know if they're gonna know if I use GPT or not, but also is just like okay, if you do use it, one, the professor can probably recognize it, and two, what's your point, right? Like you wrote your paper and you got your B minus, but what did you actually get out of
Right.
that assignment? And I think that taking that a step further by taking it and being like, okay, let's talk about, especially with writing, let's talk about form and tone. This is a
Mhm.
great way to talk about tone. Like, how can we change this to sound like a a middle-aged whatever, or like,
Yeah.
are you from Appalachia, or something like
Right.
that. So I think that taking the concept that could make a student want to cheat and switching it on its head and being like, okay, let's make an assignment out of this.
Right. And I think that idea that, again, it can write a B minus paper.
Right.
Well, now my standard for a B minus might be different
Yeah.
because now that I know you can get a B minus paper for free, well, now that's a D paper.
Right.
That's
Exactly.
not, and what I'm going to expect a B minus paper to look like is going to be different
Yeah.
because at least you should start from that generated paper and then done something to
Right.
it.
Do these layers of
Yeah.
analysis, or
And again, is it just I have a different AI tool edit it for you?
right.
And that's the part where I think we don't know. And right now it's bad at that, but my guess is soon it's going to be, and these new versions are coming out so
Very
quickly
fast,
that
yeah.
it's not like, oh, in 10 years we have to worry about it. It's in 2 years, I think we're going to be seeing these much, and even right now, a lot of the tools are built with guardrails. There's the whole story about how ChatGPT is horrible at math.
Mm-hmm.
Well, other tools like Wolfram Alpha is great at math, but the ChatGPT, the OpenAI people, they specifically have ChatGPT not calling Wolfram Alpha as it's doing its calculations. It's using Google searches to do its calculations. But certainly for a local tool, that idea about building your boutique AI tool that you
Right.
use, why wouldn't it just call Wolfram Alpha or
Right.
Mathematic or whatever calculator tool you want it to use? And then it's very good at it. And then it's going to put it in natural language. It's going to explain, it's going to solve the word problems. And right now, the companies have built the guardrails, and partially because they're different corporations and all that stuff, that there's reasons why they don't share their material. But, um, and even directions, if you have ChatGPT for directions, it doesn't go to Google Maps and get the directions and then put it into natural language. It looks at previous searches to find those directions.
Mm.
And so it's worse than Google Maps. It doesn't have that live real-time traffic that Google Maps can incorporate, but it could. And once it could, that would be an even better tool. And again, now it's going to put it in natural language processing. Now you could have it give you directions in a very different way than a tool like Google Maps does. And to think of how how just that getting directions has changed from MapQuest from 15 years ago, from having to have a map open in front of you while you're driving,
Right.
to now it can pull, oh, there was an accident 50 miles ahead. and I'm going to tell you to go a different direction. Here the interstate's splitting up ahead, and here's where you have to make the choice about whether you're taking 70 or 40, whatever.
Yeah.
I think that's gonna only increase. And as they start to think about those sort of sharing arrangements among the different corporations, I think that's going to be when it's really crazy. And we're already seeing that with X, what used to be Twitter. How many tweets are now totally generated now? They're not actual humans involved at all.
Yeah.
And even how many tweet dialogues are not having people involved.
Reminds me of the dead internet theory. Have you heard of that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of the corpus of data, I mean, some of that stuff is not accurate or up to date either, right? Like I was just prompted, Claude is my favorite engine, so I use Claude a lot. And I had asked what its predictions are for the NFC North divisional championship this year. And it had said my data cutoff, learning cutoff was April 1st, 2024 or something. So I can't accurately predict da. And I didn't really think about that. I guess I kind of just assumed that it was using constant.
Right. No, each version has a cutoff. So the really cutting edge one, ChatGPT 3, that used the internet through October 2021, I think. And because the idea is it had to build, and it takes tons of processing time to build these networks across all the knowledge that it has. And then ChatGPT 4 used 23, but that idea that every time they take a new snapshot of the internet or of whatever they're using, and again, that's partially on purpose, that they do that on purpose, and these more local tools can pull in more current things. I mean, you could easily imagine if we had a local version, this one that we're talking about, licensing, that we do put our student papers in it, and it'll learn how Truman students write, and how does an A student at Truman write, and how does a struggling international student write, how does a distracted student who wrote an okay paper but didn't put the time into it write. Like, after teaching for 25 years, I kind of have an idea of what that sounds like, but I can't explain it in simple words. But that's the kind of thing Gen AI tools are really good at, is taking kind of those hunches, those again, and if you think about it, I mean, that's exactly what I'm doing. I have a corpus of all the papers I've read teaching gyms for 20 years, all those things. And so I have this idea of how to give advice, or what you're missing. And if it can build those connections, that's really cool.
And it's doing that in nanoseconds. While it might take 15 minutes.
Well, or on some days I'm better than other days.
Exactly.
Or at 8 in the morning, I'm different than 2 in the afternoon.
And you'd like to say that it also avoids human bias, but it doesn't, because the data
is it's built in.
The bias is built in with the people that are inserting the data,
Right. That the internet is made of people. And so taking all your knowledge from the internet is going to give you the same biases that the people, and not even people now. I mean, one of the things we're finding is historic data, which was even more bad. It had more racism, more sexism, more all the things that, I mean, I know society still has a ways to go, but we're better than we used to be in a lot of ways. But if you're using these historic corpus writings, well, that's going to be baked into your models, baked into that 10th grade paper you're getting. It's going to have, Mad Men style sensibilities in it, because that's what it's drawing from.
Yeah. So I think it's also important to be able to recognize the bias as well. Just like, reading any other article, scholarly article, you want to be able to recognize bias in it. So recognizing the bias of what AI is giving you and spitting out back, I think, is pretty important. Because I think there might be a tendency to take it as gospel, take it seriously right as it comes out. Which
and it's not like a calculator really does give you the right answer every time. That 8 times 7 is 56 every time in a calculator. And in a Gen AI tool, that's not as true. And because it is sampling, because it is pulling from different quarters of the internet, and again, historic internet, which is the best football team, that changed over time. And and you could imagine pulling from 100 different experts over which team's going to win the NFC, whichever conference.
It'll be the Vikings, NFC North.
But if you could pull from 100 current experts, well, maybe you could get a good answer for that. But if you're bringing in historic data, well, then you're gonna pull in one in the 70s. That was when they were good. But figuring that out, I mean, and unlike people, it's very bad at recognizing its biases or
Yeah.
explaining its biases.
Yeah.
Because if you could say that and it said, well, I pulled from more recent thing, I weighed that more heavily, but I went all the way back to 1973 to see
Right.
why the Vikings are good. Grant Tarkington is awesome. You know, it's not going to be able to tell you that in the same way that a person
Yeah.
could. And even me just going through, who is that guy from Minnesota in the 70s? That I think that kind of thing, I think we're still learning. And maybe again, that's the thing of future, it's already the case that it cites sources better.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons I like Copilot, it does link to things, it does show you where it cites. And you can go to those sites and see what's wrong. And especially if you see sources where you're like, oh, that's totally full of crap.
Right.
Being able to identify that is a plus. And again, maybe it'll get better at that, but
Yeah. Because it's one thing to be prompting it like, what's 2 + 5, but another thing to be asking questions about the intricacies of the criminal justice system and everything. So it really can get a little bit wonky with where it's fetching its data from. And I just think it's important for, us to be smart and vigilant about how we're using these tools.
right.
But yeah.
Right.
Well, I know that was a lot to chew on, but thank you for all of your insights. If you guys have any questions, feel free to email us, and maybe Scott even.
Yeah, you can email me.
Yeah,
I'm at salberts@Truman.
Yeah.
I'd be happy to talk about it.
But thanks, Scott.
Okay, you bet. Thanks.
Okay, welcome back. Kate, that was a great interview. Good job.
Yeah, thanks. Like I said earlier, I think I felt a little bit underqualified, but as we got to speaking about it, we are of the age where we kind of just grew up with the evolution of technology, and it's something that I've been using way more often than I thought that I was using, and now that I'm actually not stubbornly refusing to use AI, it's been really fun. So
No, I definitely agree. And thanks again to Scott.
yeah,
Really appreciate you coming and helping us out here today. All right. Well, we did want to check in with, I know last week or a couple weeks ago, whenever, we had a tour of the Kirk building. We've actually been there since then, and
we have.
man, it looks like a lot has changed already. So we don't
Yeah,
have a full tour again because that would be a lot, but we did get some pictures of the forum area, again, our kind of favorite areas. So I'll kind of run through those. A little bit of the scaffolding has been removed, so you can kind of more see what the just kind of the cavernous nature of the room looks like. It feels a lot more open to me now than all those having to crawl through all those bars all the time. And the reason part of the scaffolding is still up is actually the reason we were there, and that was that we had contractors installing the big drop-down projection screen that's going to be put in that room. So that was put in, speakers are put in. We can officially say there is tech in Kirk now.
there is
Our
tech and
job is
Kirk.
done. We can walk away. No, there's
Sweet.
still quite a bit to do over the next couple of weeks, but it is exciting to see that get started. All right. Well, that's all I have for today. Anything you want to wrap up with, Kate?
Yeah, just if you are incorporating AI in your classes, we'd love to know how and why and what gives. And if you have used it, we're always interested in the application of these features that we speak about. So let us know, email us, come talk to us, so then we can spread the word. And if it helps another class incorporate it as well, then that's also great. So
Sounds good. All right. Well, we will be back in a couple weeks. I'm hoping to do a recap of our QM Connect conference. Hopefully, we'll have some good information to share with you, Diane and I, when we return from that in a couple weeks. So we will see you then.
yeah.
All right. You ready? Cool. All right. Welcome to Trim and Tech. Nope, that's not right. Off to a great start.
Read Bulldog Tech Talks.
Bulldog Tech Talks. Yep.
Yeah.
Hey, welcome to True. I've just said it so many times. I think it's because I'm in this seat.
Oh yeah, because that's where you record your
Yeah.
yeah.
This will probably be a section we cut.
You are recording, by the way, right?